Welcome to our 10 Investigate special on zombie campaigns, the controversial committees that live on for years even after a politician's career has died.
It is a phrase coined by investigative reporter Noah Pransky, who partnered with the Tampa Bay Times to expose giant loopholes in campaign finance laws. They found some disgraced and even some dead. Congress members still politically active, blowing through money on things like dinner and drinks, iPads, and football tickets. It's only been 5 months since their investigation launched, but it's already garnered national attention, accolades, and action.
Washington has noticed too. Our zombiecampaigns.com website and social media videos have gone viral, prompting formal investigations on congressional spending. 2 members of Congress from opposite sides of the aisle got together to file a bill to curb the abuse, and the Federal Election Commission changed federal campaign finance rules. Among the 100+ politicians put under the microscope, former presidential candidates as well as members of President Trump's cabinet.
Zombie Campaigns was the result of a year-long investigation into millions of FEC records. This was Noah Pransky's first story in revealing his findings.
Drain the swamp, they said, focusing the nation's attention on the politicians controlled by special interests. With all the attention here on the swamp creatures of the Capitol, nobody's paying attention to the zombies, former lawmakers whose careers are dead, but their campaigns have come to life to help subsidize their new careers and lifestyles after they've left office.
5 nights in a Virginia hotel, that's the campaign. Oh, yes, it was. It was after he retired.
But it's not just that retired Georgia senator keeping his campaign alive long after he left D.C. We found former Congress members still spending money years after they died. This campaign finance loophole is so big, you can drive a hearse through it.
If you can't sometimes laugh at the ridiculousness of it, you can't come to work every day.
Noah Bookbinder is a former federal prosecutor who says it's getting harder and harder to drain the swamp. Which is why, in his current job as executive director for nonpartisan watchdog group CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, Bookbinder now files lawsuits against politicians who use campaign money as personal slush funds. But even he was surprised at what we found. 100 former Congress members, senators, and presidential candidates still quietly spending campaign money long after giving up the game.
It's really shameful when you see this many people exploiting the system.
The Federal Election Commission says candidates should never personally benefit from campaign contributions. And after a 6-month wind-down period, retired lawmakers should close their accounts and donate leftover money to charity or other established political committees. Except they aren't required to retire their campaigns. So these politicians can keep their lucrative accounts open indefinitely. Our team, in partnership with the Tampa Bay Times, spent a year analyzing more than 1 million public campaign finance records we downloaded from the FEC's webpage. And we traveled the country to interview reluctant politicians, like former Texas Congressman and 2-time presidential hopeful Ron Paul.
Dr. Paul?
These former lawmakers spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on questionable items, like tickets to sporting events, cell phone bills, and what appear to be vacations. Former Georgia Senator Saxby Chambliss still spending from a campaign account after leaving Washington for a lobbying firm.
You retired from Senate 3 years ago. Why do you still have a campaign account open?
Because there's money.
Get this, he's far from the worst offender. Florida Congressman Mark Foley resigned in shame when he was caught sexting high schoolers. The Republican, though, spent the last decade using leftover campaign cash on memberships to posh social clubs in West Palm Beach, as well as travel, meals, and a personal computer. Ron Paul hasn't campaigned on anything in more than 5 years, but he's continued to cut tens of thousands of dollars worth of checks to his daughter to manage his campaign finances. And the granddaddy of them all, South Carolina Democrat Robin Talent, who hasn't served in Congress in 25 years. He spent much of that time living off his old campaign cash, though, paying for travel, a new iPad, and his country club dues, which is actually one of the few things the FEC does specifically prohibit under any circumstance.
There's just no legitimate explanation for that, and it's just outrageous. I mean, it is the kind of abuse that people only perpetrate when they're sure that nobody's watching.
The more we dug, the more outrageous the abuse. Case in point, former Hawaii Congressman Mark Takai. His campaign has paid a political operative more than $100,000 to act as treasurer and consultant after Takai left office. What makes it so outrageous? Well, Congressman Takai died from cancer in 2016, meaning the consultant who took charge of the money is paying himself campaign cash to consult on a dead man's campaign. And the Federal Elections Commission, which has one job, oversee campaign spending, has done nothing to stop the absurdities.
If the Federal Election Commission is not going to act on this, then maybe the only way to get to action is to shame people.
All told, the 100+ campaigns we identified as exploiting the system are sitting on tens of millions of dollars in cash with virtually no oversight on how they can spend it. Former Florida Senator George Lemieux.
Why not just close the account down and roll the money into charity?
Well, I may, and that's what I've been advised to do.
Both Democrats and Republicans are committing these abuses. Both Democrats and Republicans should be getting behind doing something about it.
There have been efforts to curb the abuses in recent years, but you haven't heard of them because the bills never got a single hearing. As for the political operatives spending a dead man's campaign cash, he says the congressman's family wanted him to stay on all this time to help set up a charitable foundation with leftover money. He finally created one in January, 18 months after the congressman died, and 2 days after we started pressing him for answers. Noah Pransky, 10 Investigates.
In addition to the original reporting, 10 Investigates built zombiecampaigns.com. It's a one-stop shop for you to read our story, dig into our online database of former candidates taking advantage of the system, and of course, watching our videos. That includes a few extra segments that caught fire on social media, a throwback to the 1990s era pop-up video, and a tribute to the 1970s era Schoolhouse Rock.
It's such a giant loophole you can still spend when you're dead. Friends could claim that you're campaigning to pay for their dinner spread. And when Congress had the chance to fix, it's a bill they chose to kill. Because one day, they'll too have zombie accounts likely worth $1 million.
The success on social media helped draw attention to issues that were going unchecked. And in part 2 of his series, Noah exposed how Washington is determined to keep the zombie loopholes open.
This story starts with a Disney show tune in a gay bar a stone's throw from the U.S. Capitol. It was inspiration for a bill introduced in Congress last year.
Let it go. At some point, you got to let it go.
California Congressman Mark Takano is a Democrat who wants to drain the swamp in Washington. The openly gay lawmaker says a light bulb went off one night when he was among the show tunes loving crowd at JR's.
I'm hoping to leverage, popular culture here,
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
Thus, the Let It Go Act, a bill designed to close a little-known but much-abused loophole that allows former politicians to keep spending their campaign cash long after their careers are over. Not on campaigning, but on subsidizing their lifestyle.
I think it's a very reasonable thing we're asking former members of Congress to do.
We stumbled upon Takano's crusade as we were investigating zombie campaigns, lucrative accounts belonging to former politicians who have long retired but are still spending like they're not, sometimes violating federal laws that prohibit personal benefit from campaign funds. Our team, in partnership with the Tampa Bay Times, combed federal election records to identify more than 100 campaigns with questionable spending years after the lawmakers stopped campaigning, sometimes decades after they retired. You might recognize some of them: Mark Foley, Joe Kennedy II, Ron Paul, spending funds on things like fancy dinners, travel, and paying family members. And nobody in Washington seems to notice or care.
It is legal, but I don't think it should be.
Takano's bill proposed that lawmakers must close their accounts down within 6 years of leaving office. That means leftover cash then goes to charity or other political committees. Now, 6 years is 12 times longer than the FEC says should be necessary to close one down, but his bill never even got a hearing.
You retired from Senate 3 years ago. Why do you still have a campaign account open?
No surprise, former Georgia Senator Saxby Chambliss and the owners of other zombie campaigns we tracked down all over the country weren't in the mood to talk.
Get out of here. You spent thousands of dollars on things like hotels and food. How is that campaigning? After you retired.
We don't have anything to discuss.
While others still spending, candidates had no comment at all because they were dead. We found candidates' campaigns open for years after they died, still spending money.
Well, that's that is incredible.
And somehow, the FEC still did nothing.
Well, I often call the FEC the failure to enforce commission.
Meredith McGahey is the executive director at Issue One, a nonpartisan D.C. nonprofit dedicated to getting the money out of politics so Congress can go back to working for the people. She says the abuses run rampant because of both the lack of enforcement and efforts by House and Senate leadership to kill campaign finance reforms.
Really what it's going to take is some brave people up on the Hill to step forward and be willing to offend their leadership and spend political capital.
Meet brave person on the Hill, Walter Jones, a longtime Republican congressman from North Carolina.
If any member of Congress is not willing to let sunshine in, then the democracy is threatened.
Jones tells us he'll refile a bill that could curb controversial spending after a member dies by allowing him or her to first designate how leftover campaign funds should be dispersed. He may also propose mandating that all leftover cash be sent to other campaigns or charities within 1 year of a member's death. The last time he filed his bill, he was killed by his fellow Republicans in the Senate.
Well, no, it's just that nobody seems to care about reform. I made the statement many times publicly back in my district that the only way we're going to get reform is to have a scandal.
A scandal like dead candidates spending campaign cash?
We have enough of a swamp. We should drain as much of the swamp as we can, and I regard this as a very modest effort. Let your money go to a higher purpose for what you built your career on.
Senator Saxby Chambliss, whom we caught up with after he ignored multiple requests for an interview, later sent us a short statement that read he complies with all federal laws and discloses all of his campaign expenditures, which may actually be true. But when federal law allows a retired lawmaker to expense 5 nights in a ritzy resort, critics say it's time to reassess our federal laws. In Washington, Noah Pransky, 10 Investigates.
This investigation didn't just involve collaborating with the Tampa Bay Times. 10 Investigates spent nearly a year collaborating with dozens of stations across the country within the Tegna television network.
The series also inspired a tremendous amount of additional reporting on zombie campaigns from Hawaii to San Francisco to Maine. National outlets followed as well, including zombie reports from Huffington Post, Newsday, and Bloomberg. It was the talk of Twitter once our stories went live, collecting thousands of clicks and retweets from around the country. An Ask Me Anything session with our investigative team reached the #1 overall spot on Reddit. And a number of watchdog groups sounded alarms, pressing the Federal Election Commission to change its rules. This is former FEC Chair Ann RAVEL.
The law absolutely has to change. I mean, the fact that a person has received campaign funds that are meant for certain things and it pays off individuals is absolutely not what was intended by the law.
And change was not far away.
When our zombie campaign special returns, we'll tell you how both the FEC and members of Congress started to change their ways.
And don't forget, you can see more of our extensive reporting with all the documents we've gathered on zombiecampaigns.com. Keep it here. We'll be right back.
Your career may die, but your money never will. We all love the zombie count, Capitol Hill.
Welcome back. One of the most significant changes in the last 5 months since 10 Investigates and the Tampa Bay Times broke the zombie campaign story has come from the FEC. In April, the agency responded to our reporting and announced they would start reviewing former lawmakers' campaign spending for the first time. In fact, they credited our stories for the rare administrative action.
But the weak enforcement has been just one part of the problem. The other issue stems from vague laws with giant loopholes. Former Congress members reached out to NOAA, calling on their old colleagues in the House and Senate to step up for a fix.
I don't think there's anyone in their right mind that think dead candidates should be spending money for someone to consult on their campaign. They're dead.
Former Congressman Trey Radel is now the host of a conservative radio show out of Southwest Florida.
Does bipartisanship still exist?
And he says his phone's lit up after reading the headlines from our story.
These examples may not technically violate the letter of the law. Undoubtedly, they violate the spirit of the law, not only within the little bubble of Washington, D.C., but also what donors across the United States want from their members of Congress.
Radel is no stranger to controversy himself. He resigned in 2014 after he was caught in D.C. with cocaine. Yet he still managed to comply with the Federal Election Commission's guidelines that say you should wind campaign spending down after 6 months. That guideline, though, is not a requirement, which has allowed some well-funded lawmakers to continue to personally profit from donations years after leaving D.C.
It's nothing short of insane.
The message was heard. In April, Republican Gus Bilirakis and Democrat Kathy Castor filed a bipartisan bill based on 10 Investigates reporting.
They came to our studio to give us that news first.
People do not expect you to be able to use your campaign account to pay club fees, cell phone bills, especially years and years after you're out of office.
Maybe, just maybe, the Honest Elections and Campaign No Gain Act could stop that.
Again, this needs to be done, and the public really appreciates this.
Our investigation revealed some Congress members spending leftover campaign funds 25 years after leaving office.
Get out of here.
Others paying family members.
Dr. Paul?
Instead of closing down accounts when they're done campaigning and rolling the money into other political or charitable accounts, as the Federal Election Commission suggests. The new bill proposes to require former Congress members to close down their campaign accounts within 2 years of leaving office, prohibit payments to family members, and ban former Congress members from lobbying until they've closed down those accounts. A small step toward restoring public trust, according to Castor and Bilirakis, but also a tough sell to their counterparts in Congress.
You're biting off a lot here.
It is an ambitious effort. But you know what? We're away from our families. You know, we've got to do good things up there. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
That bill is now making its way through the House Administration Committee.
But it's got an uphill battle thanks to some Congress members like Lakeland's Dennis Ross. The prominent Republican isn't on the House Administration Committee, but he is in what we call zombie in training. When the four-term congressman unexpectedly announced his retirement 2 months ago, Noah asked if he planned on winding down his campaign account after he left office. The response? A straightforward no. Ross is one of 64 Congress members who won't run for re-election in the fall, and together they have almost $100 million in bank donations with little restriction on how they can spend it.
That doesn't include the $5 million campaign dollars still held by current and former members of President Trump's cabinet. Many of them have also chosen to keep their old campaign accounts open. And recently, Noah took to Facebook to explain what all the president's men are still doing with that money.
Our zombie campaign story has made it all the way to the White House. Kind of. See, while we've been exposing the former Congress members spending old campaign funds on their new careers as lobbyists or consultants, we also now learn that there are 7 former politicians still spending after taking new jobs in President Trump's cabinet.
A huge amount of money.
So who are they? Well, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure this one out. In fact, one of them is brain surgeon Ben Carson. The Secretary of HUD is still spending his old donations more than 2 years after quitting his presidential campaign. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been spending thousands to keep his campaign officially up and running since leaving Congress. That includes a $1,200 meal last year at the swanky Capitol Hill Club. Then there's Tom Price, the now former Health and Human Services Secretary, who had to resign in September after he was caught spending hundreds of thousands of tax dollars on charter flights. He was spending his old congressional campaign funds too, and still hasn't stopped. And Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke has blown through more than 40 grand in campaign funds since he left Congress on things like meals and travel. That's on top of the taxpayer-funded travel spending he's been under fire for. These findings were first reported by nonprofit watchdog MapLight. All told, these 7 men have spent hundreds of thousands of campaign dollars since they left Congress on items that have included cell phone bills, storage units, and airfare. We didn't find any evidence of charitable donations from any of those accounts. And with nearly $6 million more campaign bucks still sitting in the bank, don't expect their spending to stop anytime soon. By comparison, during President Obama's 8-year tenure in the White House, 3 members of his cabinet over that time spent campaign money from old congressional funds more than a year after they left the House. This truly is a loophole both parties take advantage of. Noah Pransky, 10 Investigates.
As we move into the summer, 10 Investigates will continue to track progress on reform,
including the FEC's first ever scrutiny on retired lawmakers' spending, their investigations into possible illegal spending, including the case they opened against the Hawaii consultant exposed in our report, and the possible new restrictions they'll consider on how campaign funds can be spent. They recently received dozens of comments from the public about the loopholes, including a letter from Congresswoman Castor. It read in part, quote, "I believe the commission should clarify the permissible and impermissible uses of campaign funds after a person is no longer running for office. Doing so would prevent some of the most problematic spending and provide needed clarity to former office holders."
Congress will need to close loopholes in the law, too. The Honest Elections and Campaign No Gain Act will have to get through a pair of committees before it could become law. And 10 Investigates has been speaking to members of the first committee about the bill. Congressman Bill Arakis and Congresswoman Castor have also been working with the committee chairman to get the bill a hearing. You can read about the developments and see all the reporting on zombiecampaigns.com. In addition to our original investigation, you can see details on how more than 100 former lawmakers have taken advantage of the campaign finance system. Thanks for joining us tonight for our 10 Investigates special.
You can catch more on zombie campaigns and other investigations weekdays on 10 News. Have a good night.